Hello and welcome to the HUD VASH Operating Requirements webinar. We have a pretty full agenda, so I'll go ahead and get started as we want to make sure there's time at the end for questions. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll quickly go over some housekeeping items. For today's webinar, we'll provide an overview of the recent updates made to the HUD VASH operating requirements. The targeted audience is PHAs that are currently administering the HUD VASH program, but we welcomed VA staff and HUD field office staff as well. The webinar will last about 2 hours, and there will be time for questions at the conclusion of our presentation. Due to the number of attendees, all participants will be muted, and the webinar is being recorded and we'll make it available within a few weeks. Next slide, please. We ask that you enter any and all questions into the chat, and we'll try to answer as many as possible after the presentation. If we don't get to your question, please email it to us at vash@hud.gov. In doing this, please try to provide as much detail as possible because this will help us answer your questions more thoroughly. Questions received will also inform forthcoming FAQ guidance and trainings. Next slide, please. Okay, and now we'll do a quick round of introductions. Each panelist will take a moment to introduce themselves and give a quick hello. I'll begin with myself and coming off camera. Hello, everyone. My name is Courtney Herring, and I'm a housing program specialist in the Housing Voucher Management and Operations Division, or HVMOD, in HUD headquarters, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Now I'll turn it over to the HUD VASH National Team leads so they can introduce themselves. Molly Allen, take it away.
Thanks, Courtney. I'm Molly Allen, and I am a senior housing program specialist, also in the voucher policy office. And I'm also the HUD VASH national program lead on the HUD side. I have been working on the HUD VASH program since 2016. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to say that I am so excited about the work that we've been doing collaboratively with our VA partners to try to help the program evolve and help the program work for the veterans that we serve, as well as for the PHAs and the VAs that operate the program day to day. And hopefully, as folks know, we recently hosted a series of HUD VASH bootcamp sessions around the country. And I want you to know that we listened to all the feedback we received in those sessions and took that into account as we were looking at these program updates. I also want to acknowledge others in the HUD voucher office that worked with us on these operating requirements, lending their expertise and support to this. And we actually have a few of them also joining us on the call today to support and help assist with any questions. So without further ado, I'll now turn it over to Megan Deal from the VA to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Molly. My name is Megan Deal. I'm the National Director of the HUD VASH program on the VA side of the house. And just want to echo Molly's remarks about the partnership, and specifically to all of you in the field who participated in our boot camps over the last year and a half, whether you did so in person or virtually. We received just an amazing amount of feedback. Some of them were themes that we knew about. Some of them were brand new barriers that we didn't understand at the national level. And just kudos to our HUD colleagues for helping us really address a lot of those in these operating requirements. We're pretty excited to share some of the details on the weeds with you all today. So thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Megan. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'll quickly run through the agenda and then we'll get started with the presentation. We'll begin with some level setting, and I'll provide a high-level overview of the Housing Choice Voucher Program, followed by an overview of the HUD VASH program in general. Then I'll turn it over to Molly to dive into the operating requirements and highlight important updates to the program. We'll provide additional resources and contact information, then hold a Q&A session. Next slide, please. Since we have a pretty diverse group of participants, we wanted to take the time to do some level setting. As you know, HUD and the VA are large government agencies, and we tend to speak languages of our own internally. On this slide, we included some frequently used acronyms that you'll hear throughout the presentation. We thought it was important to note for those who are not well versed in these terms. Again, the presentation is being recorded and will be posted for you to reference at a later date. Next slide, please. In the spirit of level setting, I'll continue providing an overview of how the HUD VASH program is administered. HUD VASH is part of the larger Housing Choice Voucher or HCV program. HCVs enable low-income individuals and families to afford market rate units by providing a rental subsidy. The participant can choose any housing that meets the requirements of the program and is not limited to units in subsidized housing projects. Generally speaking, voucher holders contribute 30 to 40% of their monthly income toward rent, and the subsidy provided by HUD covers the rest. Public housing agencies, or PHAs, administer HCVs locally. These PHAs receive federal funding from HUD in the form of housing assistance payments, or HAP payments, and also administrative fees, which assist them in administering the program. Next slide, please. The HUD VASH program is a special purpose voucher program that is administered jointly between HUD and the Department of Veteran Affairs, or VA. HUD VASH enables homeless veterans and their families to use an HCV voucher to access safe, affordable housing while also receiving a variety of VA services. The VA provides referrals, case management, and supportive services for participating veterans through VA medical centers using VA or contract staff, or through other VA designated service providers, or DSPs. Just to note, DSPs are outside service providers that are designated through the collaborative case management process under the VA. These entities are generally referred to as the VA or VA Medical Center, or VAMC. Next slide, please. Since 2008, HUD and the VA have collaboratively awarded HUD VASH vouchers based on current geographic need and PHA administrative capacity annually. The allocation process for awarding HUD VASH vouchers has allowed PHAs to self-identify their interest in the program since 2017. HUD publishes an annual registration of interest notice containing detailed instructions that PHAs must follow if they are interested in receiving a portion of available HUD VASH vouchers. To date, over 112,000 HUD VASH vouchers have been awarded to PHA VMC partnerships, and VA funds about 4,500 staff and contractors to provide case management and supportive services to HUD VASH veterans, which Megan will provide additional detail on later in the presentation. Over 730 PHAs nationwide administer HUD VASH vouchers in partnership with 139 VA medical centers. There is at least one PHA currently administering HUD VASH in each state: the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and Guam. Please see the HUD VASH website for a full list of HUD VASH awards by PHA, and all PHAs can be located using the HUD Resource Locator tool, which is also linked on the HUD VASH website. Next slide, please. HUD VASH vouchers are authorized under Section 8 of the U.S. Housing Act of 1937, as modified by the requirements in the 2008 Consolidated Appropriations Act. All congressional appropriations acts since 2008 have continued to authorize this program, most recently the Appropriations Act of 2024. Generally, the HUD VASH program is administered by PHAs in accordance with regular HCV and PBV, or project-based voucher, program requirements, which can be found at 24 CFR sections 982 and 983 respectively. Unless noted otherwise, regular HCV requirements apply. The authorizing language, however, allows HUD to waive or specify alternative requirements for any provision of any statute or regulation affecting the HCV program to effectively deliver and administer HUD VASH voucher assistance. Next slide, please. The HUD VASH operating requirements establish waivers and alternative requirements that differ from regular HCV program requirements. These operating requirements were initially published in the Federal Register on May 6, 2008. Subsequent revisions were made on March 23, 2012, September 27, 2021, and most recently on August 13th of this year. The current version of the operating requirements will remain in effect as long as the HUD VASH program is authorized by Congress or the authorization requirements change through a new Federal Register notice. The operating requirements apply to all PHAs that administer HUD VASH vouchers, including those who have not received an allocation of HUD VASH vouchers, but administer these vouchers as a receiving PHA under the portability feature of the HCV program. Next slide, please. We wanted to highlight some additional points for consideration as we walk you through the new guidance. Please keep in mind that this most recent update to the operating requirements became effective upon publication on August 13, 2024. HUD is fully aware that it will take PHAs some time to update their internal processes and get into compliance with the new guidance, so grace will be extended in that respect. Additionally, the HUD VASH operating requirements include requirements and flexibilities known internally as the musts and the mays. Molly will go into more detail about that in a minute. Another important note is that PHAs do not need to update their PHA administrative plan to implement the program requirements, aka the musts, but they are required to update the PHA administrative plan to implement the optional flexibilities or the mays. PHAs may also seek individual HUD VASH waivers through the regular HUD field office waiver process. These variations to the program should also be noted in the PHA administrative plan. And with that, I'll turn it over to Molly to discuss the details of the recently updated operating requirements. Molly?
Thanks, Courtney. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So before we go through all of the sections of the HUD VASH operating requirements in order, I just wanted to take a moment at the top here to highlight what I think are some of the most substantive changes for PHAs to be aware of in this update to the program. As we walk through, I'll try to note what's a new requirement or flexibility and what is not. But I know that these 6 items should be some that you really pay attention to. So the exclusion of VA disability income for purposes of program eligibility, the requirement for PHAs to go up to 80% of area median income or AMI for program eligibility, the new ability to allow for 0 HAP HUD VASH families to live in HUD VASH PBV units where there are on-site HUD VASH VA services, allowing for non-competitive selection of HUD VASH PBV projects on the site of a VA facility, so like an EUL, an enhanced use lease site. In addition to PHAs being able to set a HUD VASH payment standard up to 120% without additional HUD approval, we're now allowing PHAs to approve exception payment standards as reasonable accommodations up to 140% without additional HUD approval. And then finally, allowing PHAs to set a separate minimum rent, or it could be a 0 minimum rent, specifically for their HUD VASH families. Next slide, please. So here are all the updated sections of special rules and requirements that are available under this notice. And I already see where, folks are probably writing things down furiously, but want to confirm, as Courtney mentioned, that all of these slides will be available afterwards, and we will be posting this recording as well. So all of this will be made available. We'll go ahead and move into the next slide, our first section. Okay, so starting at the beginning with family eligibility selection and documentation. This slide is not new material to the program. HUD VASH eligible families consist of homeless veterans and their families. Note that when HUD says family here, we don't necessarily mean blood relatives. We're talking about the household makeup. By agreeing to administer the HUD VASH program, the PHA is relinquishing its authority to determine the eligibility of families in accordance with the regular HCV program rules and PHA policies with 2 exceptions. PHAs must still determine income eligibility and lifetime sex offender status. Noting that lifetime sex offender status is based on state law, so state laws can change, and that's something to stay current on. When HUD VASH applicants or recipients include veterans with disabilities or family members with disabilities, HUD's regular reasonable accommodation requirements still apply. When adding additional family members after the HUD VASH family is admitted to the program, the regular rules at 24 CFR 982 551 H2 apply. Other than birth, adoption, or court-awarded custody of a child, the PHA must approve additional family members and may apply its regular screening criteria in doing so. The PHA does not have to. This would be a policy set in the PHA admin plan. Next slide, please. As previously noted, eligibility determination and veteran selection is done by the VA. This means PHAs are not able to maintain a waiting list or apply local preferences for the HUD VASH program and must accept referrals as they come in from the VA. VA refers HUD VASH eligible families to the PHA for the issuance of a HUD VASH voucher or the identification of a PBV unit that is exclusively made available for HUD VASH families, which we would call a HUD VASH PBV unit. PHAs could also be, veterans could also be matched with a regular PBV unit, and that unit could then be redesignated to HUD VASH, something we'll cover in more detail when we talk about HUD VASH PBV later. Next slide, please. The only time this selection and intake process may differ is if the PHA has been approved as a DSP, a designated service provider. So let's take a moment to talk about PHAs as DSPs. This is not a new policy in these HUD VASH operating requirements, but it is the first time we've had the updated application and guidance materials in the operating requirements. So PHAs as DSPs means that the VA may approve a PHA with unleased HUD VASH vouchers as a designated service provider for the purposes of veteran selection and intake. The PHA-specific DSP authority allows a PHA to issue a HUD VASH voucher to a veteran without a referral from the VA. The PHA is then responsible for providing temporary case management until such time as they can refer the veteran to the VA for ongoing case management. The materials and the application may be found on the VA site. The link is here. Note that this is different from the regular DSP designation process for ongoing DSP authority. Materials related to DSPs generally, which is typically a third-party provider, may be found on the VA site at that link. Megan, did you want to add anything on this particular slide?
No, I think the only thing I would add, Molly, is that because this is a new process, that both VA and HUD leadership remain available for consultation if there's sites that want to dig into this opportunity in more depth.
Great. Yeah, some additional materials coming on this process as well, noting that it is just something that is noted in the HUD VASH operating requirements, but we're not kind of going into depth on that here. Next slide, please. So this is new for the operating requirements, but not new policy. This conforms to the HOTMA updates related to identity and SSN verification. So PHAs must follow the Social Security verification hierarchy to verify identity. PHAs must use the available flexibilities in accordance with the HOTMA Income and Asset Final Rule, which is further detailed in PIH Notice 2023-27, to accept certification of SSN in at least one third-party document, such as bank statement, utility or cell phone bill, or benefit letter that consists of the name of the individual in the absence of other documentation. In the case of the veteran, the PHA must accept the Certificate of Release or Discharge from Active Duty, the DD-214, or the VA Verified Application for Health Benefits, the 1010-EZ, as verification for SSN if those forms are available. However, those forms are not required to verify SSN. These documents must also be accepted for proof of age purposes. And please note that veterans are also issued photo identification cards by the VA, and these cards must be accepted by the PHA in lieu of other types of government issued photo identification. Next slide, please. Okay, moving on to the next section, income and asset eligibility. The PHA must determine income eligibility for the HUD VASH families in accordance with 24 CFR 982.201. Income targeting requirements do not apply for HUD VASH families to allow PHAs to serve veterans at a range of income levels. PHAs must serve all income eligible veterans, including low income veterans. So that includes veterans up to 80% AMI in HUD VASH. This was previously optional, but is now a requirement in the program. Next slide. Additionally, VA service-connected disability benefits are now excluded for purposes of determining income eligibility. However, they are still included for purposes of calculating the total tenant payment, or TTP, the housing assistance payment, or HAP, and the family share. In order to ensure that homeless veterans are not excluded from participation in the HUD VASH program because of their VA service-connected disability benefits, PHAs must determine the applicant's annual income for purposes of income eligibility by excluding all VA service-connected disability benefits received by the HUD VASH applicant, in addition to income exclusions listed under 24 CFR 5.609b. HUD knows that these changes may increase the likelihood of eligible HUD VASH families not having a HAP, and an initial HAP is, of course, required to execute a HAP contract. The family would need to select a unit with a gross rent that is still above the family TTP in order to lease a unit in the tenant-based program. For HUD VASH PBV, the family would also need a monthly HAP. However, HUD is providing a waiver and alternative requirement where the PHA may still admit a zero HAP family to a PBV unit in a project that is either on the grounds of a VA facility or there are HUD VASH supportive services on site for the project. We'll speak to this further in the PBV section. Next slide, please.
You are unmuted.
So for now, PHAs must manually calculate income eligibility, excluding VA service-connected disability benefits. This manual calculation needs to be done only for those veterans that are otherwise ineligible, meaning above the 80% AMI. For those that are ineligible and receiving VA service-connected disability benefits, PHAs must remove those benefits and determine if that would make the veteran eligible, i.e. put them below the 80% AMI. The HUD 5058 will reflect the annual income and adjusted income including the VA service-connected disability amounts, because these still must be used and included for rent calculation. The PIC system will accept the HUD 5058 even if the income is considered over income and ineligible, including the VA service-connected disability. Please let HUD know if you have any issues with this with your software. HUD will update this when guidance changes. Next slide, please. PHAs may not deny admission to a family with zero income. When a family reports that they have zero income, the PHA must accept a self-certification of zero income. PHAs must now accept self-certification by the family that the family's total assets are equal to or less than $50,000 at new admission. PHAs may choose to accept this self-certification upon recertification. When PHAs begin implementing the asset limitation for HOTMA, PHAs must not enforce the asset limitations for HUD VASH families at reexamination. PHAs will enter the amount of assets on the HUD 5058 and the annual income earned from assets, which is also self-certified. Note that the PHA should continue using the existing pre-HOTMA definitions of net family assets and rules for imputing income from assets until such time as HOTMA has been fully implemented, and this guidance will be updated. Next slide, please. Okay, now on to the next section, initial search term of the HCD. No major updates here, just a clarification that the extended initial term of the HUD VASH voucher of 120 days applies both to that initial issuance and any moves with continued assistance. Next slide, please. Next section, initial lease term. No major updates to this section. HUD VASH leases may be shorter than the traditional 12 months. We want to provide maximum flexibility for veterans in terms of the available units they may select. Next slide. Next section is eligible housing. No updates here other than a slight name change. This used to be ineligible housing. It's now eligible housing. Basically, we're clarifying here that HUD VASH is allowed on the grounds of a VA medical facility. Next slide. The next section here is mobility and portability. No major updates to this section. This is a long and important section, but the changes in this version are very minimal. So in general, due to the VA case management requirement, we have distinct portability requirements under the HUD VASH program. HUD VASH participant families may reside only in those jurisdictional areas that are accessible to the case management services as determined by the VA. However, if the veteran has graduated from case management, regular portability and mobility applies. Portability in the HUD VASH program must not be restricted in cases where the family did not reside in the jurisdiction of the PHA at time of application of HUD VASH assistance. A family that moves under the portability procedures must not be subject to rescreening at the receiving PHA. Next slide. So we've outlined here the different requirements for different kinds of ports in the HUD VASH program. In all cases, the initial VA must be consulted to ensure that the case management will be able to be provided at the receiving location. Only in cases of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking can the PHA move forward with the port following the emergency transfer plan prior to consultation with the VA. However, they must still alert the VA as soon as possible. So moves within the initial VA catchment area, the receiving PHA, if the receiving PHA has a HUD VASH program, they may choose to bill or absorb. If the receiving PHA does not have a HUD VASH program, then they must bill. Moves beyond the initial VA catchment area, the receiving PHA must also have a HUD VASH program and must absorb that voucher. The VA must first determine that the HUD VASH family could be served by another VA medical facility that is participating in the program, and the receiving PHA must have that HUD VASH voucher available for the family. So an extensive amount of coordination needed there. And HUD has committed to providing additional resources on portability in the HUD VASH program in the future. So noting that here. Next slide, please. Okay, and I'm now going to turn it over to Megan Deal from the VA to talk a bit about the case management and supportive services requirements of the program.
Thank you, Molly. So I'm just going to review this section of the operating requirements, and I'll highlight for you that this section is not very much changed from the last one, so there's nothing really new here, other than some tweaks in wording to better reflect the services provided by VA. In general, the VA's role in the HUD VASH program is to provide really a comprehensive package of case management and supportive services to veterans that are in the program. It's a little hard to sort of whittle down what those services are to a list, but we make an attempt to do this in the operating requirements in creating certain categories. So I'm going to run through these categories quickly. The first of these is the screening of homeless veterans. So veterans are identified in the HUD VASH program through the VA program, the VA staff members. They may be doing this in conjunction with their community partners, their coordinated entry system, other COC partners, and the PHA is often involved in that process as well. But ultimately, the VA is responsible for identifying and doing an initial screening of homeless veterans to determine whether they meet the HUD VASH program participation criteria established by the VA National Office. And of course, that criteria is established with statute and HUD policy in mind as well. in general, VA is identifying veterans who are homeless, confirming that they are homeless, confirming that they meet the definition of veteran for the program, and also that they have case management needs. Assisting veterans with the application process and assisting the veterans in getting the documentation that they need to apply for a voucher is a part of the role of the VA as well. And then, of course, referring those veterans to the PHA. Once veterans are in the program, and by that I mean identified by VA and enrolled in HUD VASH case management, they're provided case management and supportive services even prior to the issuance of vouchers by the PHA. So there's a heavy body of work that's completed on the VA side of the house before veterans are referred to the PHA, and that could be a very quick process or it could be a longer process depending on the complexities for the veterans in getting the identification and the paperwork needed to do that referral to VA. Providing housing search assistance to HUD VASH participants with rental vouchers as part of VA's role as well. Often there's other community partners who also share this responsibility, but it is part of what VA is doing. And then more broadly, identifying and providing for the broad range of social service and medical needs of HUD VASH participants. So one of the things that's unique about the HUD VASH program, aside from having just the paired case management, which is different than most housing choice voucher programs, is to have the full range of the VA healthcare system available. So the services that HUD VASH veterans are generally linked to go beyond those provided by the specific HUD VASH case management team and extend to the range of outpatient health services, primary care services, specialty care services, sometimes hospitalization, and other supported services needed by the veterans. Those certainly aren't limited to services provided by the VA system, but that is a big part of what VA is able to bring to bear for these veterans. And then lastly, of course, maintaining records consistent with requirements for HUD and VA is part of the role as well. We'll move to the next slide. So I want to echo here that it is required that VA make available case management and supportive services to veterans as those services are needed by the veteran through the VA. So either directly by or arranged by the VA. The VA is ultimately responsible, of course, together with the veteran in helping determine the veteran's case management needs and whether those needs are continuing. If the veteran does not require HUD VASH case management any longer, because we know that people grow and change over time and they may come in needing a lot of services and ultimately they may be independent, integrated into the community, getting their services elsewhere. But they need to maintain that voucher assistance. They need the ongoing rental subsidy offered by the voucher. VA will maintain contact to provide the support needed to the veteran family, for instance, for recertification or if needs present in the future. And since HUD VASH is a longitudinal program, if a veteran is removed from HUD VASH case management because they no longer need the services, but they keep the subsidy of the voucher, should they need those services in the future, they can be re-engaged in that care either through the HUD VASH team or elsewhere in the VA system. Next slide, please. I'll hand it back to you, Molly.
Thank you, Megan. So this next section is on termination of assistance. There are no major changes to this section, but want to highlight a few HUD VASH specifics when it comes to termination of the voucher. As Megan noted about the requirement for case management, failure to participate in required case management, if the VA has determined that not participating, that the veteran is not participating and there's not good cause for not participating, the PHA must terminate the family from the HUD VASH program, and emphasizing that, you know, this is that the determination of the VA if case management is A, required, and B, met, and if there is good cause. So we want to ensure that termination of assistance due to failure to participate in required case management is very rare, if at all. We don't want veterans to be terminated for lack of participation in a specific kind of case management. As Megan said, kind of the case management requirements can look different and are specific to the needs of the particular veteran. The PHA, in cases where the voucher does need to be terminated due to failure to participate in the required case management, the PHA may choose to offer the family continued assistance through one of its regular vouchers or regular PBV unit. That policy would need to be detailed in the PHA admin plan. Note that a VA determination the veteran does not require or no longer requires case management is never grounds for termination of a voucher or for a PBV assistance. The other specific requirement to HUD VASH around eviction. PHAs may terminate a family evicted from housing assisted under the program for serious violations of the lease, but they are not required to. Prior to terminating any HUD VASH participants, HUD strongly encourages PHAs to exercise their discretion and work with the VA case manager in effort to avoid termination. We know that an eviction can make it harder to lease up, even if a veteran is able to continue their assistance. So obviously want to be working with the case manager on the front end to prevent eviction whenever possible. But in places where eviction does happen, the PHA may use their discretion not to terminate the assistance. And this can also be super helpful as we discussed in the top of our conversation, that PHAs cannot screen veterans, so that veteran, if terminated, could be re-referred from the VA and would need to be reissued a voucher so long as they met the income and lifetime sex offender requirements. So want to ensure that termination due to these items is very rare. Next slide, please. So also want to talk about family breakup. In general, in the case of a family breakup, the HUD VASH assistance must stay with the eligible HUD VASH veteran. However, the exception to that is in cases of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, in which the HUD VASH veteran is the perpetrator. In those cases, the victim must continue to be assisted. Upon termination of the perpetrator's HUD VASH voucher, the victim must be given regular HCV if one is available, and the perpetrator's HUD VASH voucher must be used to serve another eligible veteran family. If a regular HCV is not available for the victim, the perpetrator must be terminated from the assistance and the victim will continue to utilize the HUD VASH voucher. Next slide. This section around turnover of HUD VASH vouchers has remained the same throughout the history of the program. HUD VASH vouchers must continue to be used for HUD VASH. So upon one HUD VASH veteran exiting the voucher, that voucher assistance must be used for another eligible HUD VASH veteran and their family. And PHAs continue to be expected to lease up to their HUD VASH baseline based on the total number of HUD VASH vouchers available. Next slide, please. This section is on moving to work agencies, MTW agencies. It remains relatively unchanged, although there were some minor edits and clarifications. HUD VASH vouchers may be administered in accordance with flexibilities approved under a PHA's standard MTW agreement or MTW operations notice with approval from HUD's HCV office. In general, we just want to make sure that their policies don't conflict with anything in the HUD VASH program or anything in the HUD VASH operating requirements. Additionally, HUD VASH vouchers are never eligible for MTW fungibility, meaning that HUD VASH voucher funding must be used for HUD VASH HAP. That MTW agencies are expected to lease up to their HUD VASH voucher baseline. However, MTW agencies may use their MTW funding for their HUD VASH vouchers. They are not precluded from using other funding for their HUD VASH vouchers. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're getting to a section with significant updates to note, the HUD VASH PBV section. This first slide is generally not new. Regarding the project cap, all units exclusively made available to HUD VASH families, so HUD VASH PBV and a PBV project, are exempted from the PBV income mixing requirement, also known as the project cap. All units in a project could be theoretically HUD VASH PBV. The program cap. HUD VASH units made available under a competitive PIH notice for HUD VASH PBV units, also called the HUD VASH set aside, which we did between 2010 and 2016, are excluded from the PBV percentage limitation, so the program cap. So those vouchers that were awarded as HUD VASH PBV are not included in the numerator or the denominator in terms of the program cap. In general, a PHA may project base up to 20% of its authorized HCV units. The PHA may also project base an additional 10% of its authorized HCV for units that meet certain criteria, and HUD VASH may be included in that additional 10%. And then any HUD VASH units that were awarded as PBV are completely excluded from that cap. Next slide, please. Much of the content here is now further detailed in the operating requirements to conform with PBV changes. For cases of termination from PBV due to failure to participate in case management, if the PHA has a policy to allow the veteran to receive a regular HCV or PBV unit, then the PHA may substitute the family's unit on the PBV HAP contract for another unit, or remove the unit from the PBV HAP contract so that the family may remain with tenant-based assistance, or change the unit status in the PBV HAP contract from HUD VASH to a regular PBV unit. If the PHA does not have a policy to allow the veteran to receive a regular HCV or PBV, then upon notification by the VA of the family's failure to participate in the VA required case management, the PHA must provide the family a reasonable time period as established by the PHA to vacate the unit. If the family then fails to vacate the unit within the specified amount of time, the owner may evict the family. If the owner does not evict the family, the PHA must then remove the unit from the HAP contract or amend the HAP contract to substitute a different unit. Then in cases of voluntary moves from PBV, if a HUD VASH family is eligible to move from its PBV unit and there is no HUD VASH tenant-based voucher available, the PHA may require a family that still requires case management to wait for a HUD VASH tenant-based voucher for a period not to exceed 180 days. If the HUD VASH tenant-based voucher is still not available after that period of time, the family must be allowed to move using its HUD VASH voucher as a tenant-based assistance. The PHA may either amend the PBV HAP contract to replace the assistance in the PBV unit with one of its regular vouchers, or the PHA and owner may agree to temporarily remove the unit from the HAP contract. The PHA does not need to wait the 180 days to move to allow the family to move with their HUD VASH assistance. They just cannot wait longer than 180 days if a new HUD VASH voucher has still not become available. So that is always an option to do sooner than the 180 days. Next slide, please. Again, this is a new clarification. For cases of a wrong size PBV unit or a PBV unit that has accessibility features that the family no longer requires, and there's another family that does require those particular accessibility features, the PBV must notify the family and the owner within 30 days of the PHA's determination that the family is either in a wrong size unit or a unit with accessibility features the family no longer requires. PHA's offer of continued housing assistance must be made within 60 days of the PHA's determination and must be in the form of either a HUD VASH tenant-based voucher or another HUD VASH PBV unit. If no HUD VASH assistance is available for the PHA to offer within 60 days of the PHA's determination, the PHA must remove the wrong size or accessible unit from the HAP contract to make a HUD VASH voucher available to issue the family a tenant-based voucher. Separately, also noting here, because only homeless veterans may be referred for occupancy of a HUD VASH PBV unit, only occupied units whose occupants are families already receiving tenant-based HUD VASH assistance may be then added to a PBV HAP contract as units exclusively made available to HUD VASH families. Tenants cannot be moved from other voucher assistance onto a HUD VASH PBV unit or onto a regular HUD VASH tenant-based voucher, since the program is serving homeless veterans. Next slide. PHAs do not need any additional authorization from HUD headquarters to use HUD VASH vouchers as project-based vouchers. This changed with HOTMA in 2016, that PHAs do not need to request to be able to project-base their HUD VASH vouchers, which is why we no longer award HUD VASH vouchers under the HUD VASH set-aside as project-based. We allow PHAs to project-base those vouchers as needed at any time. However, PHAs must consult with their partnering VA medical facility to ensure approval of the project. PHAs in the partnering VA medical facility are expected to communicate regarding the PBV planning and development and to ensure the project meets the needs of the HUD VASH veteran population. It does not place additional restrictions on veterans that may hinder the leasing of those units. PHAs may project-base HUD VASH vouchers in alongside other PBV units, and may execute a single HAP contract covering both the HUD VASH PBVs and the other PBVs. However, note that the contract rents may not be different based on whether the unit is HUD VASH PBV or a non-HUD VASH PBV unit. So if the non-HUD VASH units have a lower cap, that lower cap is applicable when setting the rent to owner for the PBV units in the project, including the HUD VASH PBV units. In the description of units in Exhibit A of the HAP contract, PHAs must indicate the number of units that will be exclusively made available to HUD VASH families. A PHA and owner may agree to amend the PBV HAP contract to redesignate a unit as HUD VASH at any time, or to redesignate a unit that was HUD VASH to regular PBV. Next slide. So generally, PBV proposals and/or project selection for HUD VASH must follow all regular proposal and/or project selection regulations. Excuse me. This is one of the new items under PBV. However, PHAs may non-competitively select one or more PBV projects with units made exclusively available to HUD VASH families, so HUD VASH PBV, on the site of a VA facility. The method of project selection must still comply with all other requirements under 24 CFR 983.51. PHAs may consult with their partnering VA Medical Center about the option of using PBVs in conjunction with the VA's Enhanced Use Lease or EUL program. Next slide. This is the other major item I'd highlighted in this section that we'd alluded to earlier. If a PBV project is either on the grounds of the VA facility or there are HUD VASH supportive services provided on site at the project, the PHA may opt to select a unit occupied by a zero HAP HUD VASH family or admit a zero HAP HUD VASH family to unit if such unit is made exclusively available for HUD VASH families. This is to ensure that those veteran families receiving the most HUD VASH service-connected disability income are not excluded from living in HUD VASH PBV located on a VA facility that may be the best housing option for them. These particular families that came in as 0 HAP may retain the HUD VASH PBV unit with 0 HAP beyond the traditional 180 days that a family can be at 0 HAP. So that does not apply to these families that came in as 0 HAP. Of course, during any period that the family's TTP actually falls below the gross rent, normal PBV requirements apply. Alternatively, PHAs and owners, in consultation with the VA, also always have the option of removing the unit in which the 0 HAP family resides from the HAP contract. However, we know that there are owners who don't necessarily want to do that, and that's why we've created this option to allow these 0 HAP families to live in these HUD VASH PBV units that meet their needs and allow that unit to maintain its HUD VASH status. Next slide, please. The next section is CMAP, and there are 0 changes here. HUD VASH remains excluded from CMAP. Next slide. So the reallocation of HUD VASH vouchers. This section is updated because since the 2021 version of the HUD VASH operating requirements, HUD has published Notice PIH 2022-25, which outlines the process for applying for voluntary reallocation or recapture of HUD VASH vouchers. When we refer to a reallocation, we are referring to a direct reallocation between 2 different PHAs within a single VAMC catchment area that partner with that same VA. A recapture is when a PHA and VA Medical Center want to have a portion of their HUD VASH vouchers recaptured back to HUD to be reallocated in the future based on need at that time. There's a separate training on that notice, PIH 2022-25. And please let us know if you have any questions about that process. Next slide. Okay, the next slide is about inspections. The major update here is that pre-inspections of HUD VASH units are now good for a total of 90 days. Where the previous version, it had been 45 days. So if a HUD VASH family selects a unit that has passed an HQS inspection without intervening occupancy within 90 days of the RAFTA, the request for tenancy approval, which is the HUD form 52517, the unit may be approved as long as it meets all other conditions under 24 CFR at 982-305. So a longer window there. Also a note here that occupied units can be inspected in the program as long as the occupant is the tenant. We hear questions about this often in terms of HUD VASH tenants looking to lease in place. And if they are the tenant and it is okay for the initial inspection to be of that tenant's occupied unit. So just offering that clarification here on inspections. Next slide, please. So this next section is about exception payment standards. This piece is not new. PHAs may set a separate HUD VASH program payment standard. PHAs may go up to, but no higher than 120%, excuse me, 120% of the published metropolitan area-wide FMR, or fair market rent, or small area FMR, based on the PHA's applicable FMR, specifically for their HUD VASH program. So it can set a separate payment standard just for their HUD VASH families. A PHA that wants to establish a HUD VASH exception payment standard over 120% is allowed to, but still must request approval from HUD through the process outlined in Notice PIH 2018-16 or any successor notices. The new piece HUD has added here is around reasonable accommodation exception payment standards. HUD VASH PHAs may also establish an exception payment standard up to 140% of the published FMR or small area FMR based on which FMR the PHA is applying, only to be applied if required as a reasonable accommodation in accordance with 24 CFR Part 8 for a family that includes a person with a disability. So streamlining the reasonable accommodation process for HUD VASH families. Next slide, please. So this next section is on special housing types. We've not made any updates to this section. The major update to this section was actually made in the 2021 version, and that was that PHAs must permit HUD VASH clients to use the following special housing types for tenant-based HUD VASH assistance, regardless of whether these types are permitted in their admin plan for their other families. And those types are single room occupancy or SRO, congregate housing, a group home, shared housing, and cooperative housing. And we typically see congregate housing, special housing types for use for assisted living facilities. And that is an allowable use with the voucher as long as it meets all other applicable requirements. And noting that all of these could also be used as PBV with the exception of shared housing. Shared housing cannot be used with PBV. Next slide. And the final section, a totally new section, is minimum rents. PHAs can set a HUD VASH minimum rent, including a zero minimum rent, regardless of the minimum rent policies established in their admin plan for other HCV families. So this may be super helpful since often a PHA has, a PHA has a non-zero minimum rent and they have to apply their hardship exemption policy for many or most HUD VASH families. PHAs can instead just have a lower minimum rent or a $0 minimum rent specifically for their HUD VASH program. And I will now turn it back to Courtney to talk about some of the HUD VASH resources.
Thanks, Molly. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you to Molly and Megan for that thorough coverage of our new guidance. Here we just wanted to include some resources for you all to access at a later date. I'll also drop them in the chat box so you can access them right away. And lastly, we just wanted to remind everyone that the 2024 registration of interest is still open for additional HUD VASH vouchers. If your agency is interested and has not registered already, please take advantage of this opportunity to submit your ROI. The deadline to apply for that is next Friday, August 30th. And I'll also link the notice in the chat box with all the details for the requirements there. Next slide, please. Okay, again, please send your questions and concerns to vash@hud.gov. These submissions will shape forthcoming guidance. And now we'll begin answering a few questions that we've already received in the VASH mailbox, and then we'll move to the questions that you all have posed in the chat. Okay. So to begin, first question we have here is, when do the updated operating requirements go into effect? Just as a reminder.
Yes, the updated operating requirements are in effect upon publication. So they are in effect now, beginning August 13th when they were published. But we acknowledge that it may take time for PHAs to update their processes on some of these more substantive changes. So acknowledging that, but yes, they are in effect.
Great. And up next, can PHAs use their HCV admin fees to act as a DSP?
So PHAs can use their HUD VASH, their HCV admin fees in their work as a DSP with one exception. PHAs may not use HCV admin fees to perform the case management activities that are outside of their normal PHA activities under the HCV program. And just to flag that additional guidance on this is forthcoming, but that is the one specific that anything that is case management that is outside of what typically the PHA would do in the HCV program would be not an allowable use of admin fees.
Okay. Thank you for that. Next question is about over income. So this question is, if someone was recently over income due to an increase in their service connection, what would that change things for veterans?
Yeah, so if a veteran was previously determined to be ineligible, but because of their service-connected disability, making them over 80% AMI, or because the PHA did not yet go up to 80% AMI, that might change their eligibility and could be re-referred for a voucher. However, it would not change anything for anyone currently on the program because it only impacts initial eligibility.
Okay. And this next one came from APHA, and their concern is is other VA income, such as pensions, are these excluded for HUD VASH eligibility?
No, so this is an important clarification. This exclusion only applies to VA service-connected disability payments that were not in the subcategories that were already excluded from annual income. So things like VA pensions, other VA income would not be included. This is specifically VA service-connected disability payments.
Okay, thank you. Next question is regarding concern for the support for additional vouchers. They're asking if they should revisit the need for additional vouchers in light of the new guidance coming out.
I mean, I think yes, PHAs and VAMCs should consider if this changes things as far as their eligible veteran population. And just as you flagged, Courtney, PHAs have until next Friday, the 30th, to submit a registration of interest for additional HUD VASH vouchers under Notice PIH 2024-18. So please have those conversations now if you think that you may want to come in for additional HUD VASH vouchers.
Okay. Great. Okay, next one. Is there any guidance on when or how this will affect veterans currently that are already under contract and paying minimum rent portions that include VA service-connected disability payments in their rent portion calculations?
Yeah, so I think this is again clarifying that this change only applies to program eligibility. So there will be no change for rent calculations and no changes for those who are already on the program.
Okay, and we previously went over this, but I'll ask it again just for clarity's sake. Will the new rules apply to all PHAs or just the PHAs who were awarded the VASH vouchers?
Yes, as you noted at the top, I think, Courtney, these HUD VASH operating requirements and all of the changes therein apply to all PHAs administering the HUD VASH program, even those who only administer the vouchers under the portability feature of the program.
Okay. And that concludes the questions that we had received in advance of the webinar. So now we'll get into the questions that you all have posed in the chat. And I'll get started with those. For the first one, are the VA service-connected disability benefits excluded for annual recertification purposes or just at new admission?
Yeah, so I think Ashley provided the answer potentially in the chat, but this special regulation only applies for determining income eligibility at admission and does not need to be done at re-exam.
Okay. Next, for portability not subject to rescreening, does this include income? If a PHA receives a port-in that is also a new admission, they still have to screen for income and sex offender status. Is that correct?
That is correct. So specifically, the not subject to rescreening is for those porting after admission. If they're reporting prior and coming in as a new admission, they would need to be subject to the standard HUD VASH screening, which, as you noted, just includes the income eligibility and lifetime sex offender status.
Okay. Next one, can PHA's PBV VASH units be used at assisted living facilities, not nursing homes?
Yes, so made that clarification, but making it again that assisted living facilities are allowed as long as they meet all of the requirements and all of those, and if they're coming in as, if they're being allowed as congregate housing, looking at that 982 subpart M at the requirements for congregate housing specifically.
Okay. And are VASH vouchers and VASH PBB funded under a regular HCV program or a separate funding stream?
Yeah, great clarification that HUD VASH vouchers are there is not a separate funding for the project-based vouchers. PHAs take their regular vouchers and can use them as project-based, but it is from the same funding pot. So there's not a separate funding specifically for PBV.
Right. Okay. Okay, and there was a request for clarification of the lease and place allowabilities that were discussed on slide 42. Can you speak to that?
Yes, so I think that was clarifying that leasing in place is allowed. We know that happens often, both in the regular program and in HUD VASH, with especially in HUD VASH, with veterans being leased up, like with SSVF and being moved on to HUD VASH. And so a leasing in place is allowable under the program, and wanting to offer that clarification that units can be inspected to meet the HQS requirements if that veteran is being housed in place. Yeah. That speaks to the clarification needed.
Okay. Another question we had was, how do you remove a unit from a PBV HAP contract? Is there guidance we can point?
Yeah, I think we can point to some just general PBV guidance, but in general, if you have a PBV project that is, you can identify in the Exhibit A, which units and with the number of units that are being assisted, and we designate those units, whether they are HUD VASH or non-HUD VASH PBV, so you can remove units from the HAP contract if agreed upon by the owner and the PHA. And I believe we probably have additional resources on that, just on PBV generally.
Okay, great. Okay. And do all VAMC locations have living quarters that qualify for VASH PBV?
I can take that one, Courtney. This is
Sure.
Megan. No. In general, VA doesn't have brick and mortar housing, although there are some exceptions with VA facilities that have available land. There's a program called the Enhanced Use Lease Program, where those VAs can lease to another provider, and often the priority for those leases go to homeless housing providers. So there are some facilities around the country who have enhanced use lease facilities that have HUD VASH PBV programs on it, but it isn't something that's typically available at all VAs.
Okay. Thanks for that, Megan. The next question, is it possible to submit the registration of interest if the PHA is only interested in additional VASH vouchers and not PBVs? We got that question a couple times.
Yes. So clarifying that if you come in for additional HUD VASH vouchers, it is up to you locally to determine how you want to use those vouchers once awarded. Those can be used as tenant-based vouchers, or they can be used as project-based vouchers, and they can be used as tenant-based vouchers and later used as project-based vouchers. So it's really up to you locally and what makes sense locally of how you're going to use those vouchers. So yes, if you need HUD VASH vouchers as tenant-based, please come in. If you need HUD VASH vouchers and want to use them as project-based, please come in. It's the same registration of interest, regardless of how you want to apply those vouchers.
Okay, great. So this next one may be a VA question. Is there any way the VAMC would deny a veteran determined eligible for the HUD VASH program by the designated PHA DSP?
Hi, Courtney. I did respond to that one directly, but for the sake of the whole group, let me just put out here. The slide does have the link to the PHA's DSP application process, and I also can put that, if it hasn't already been put, in the chat. The short answer is that should not be something that occurs, but we know that the local processes are going to need to be different in different areas. So the application process for a PHA as DSP requires that the PHA and the VA work together to complete an MOU that outlines their local procedures for ensuring processes are in place to avoid that, ensuring that the VA or the PHA only identifies and enrolls veterans in the program who are eligible for the program and eligible for VA services as a part of the program, and ensuring there's a process to make sure that that VA case management transition can happen smoothly. So that's all part of the application process.
Okay. Great, thank you for that. Okay, next question. Oh, can zero HAP veterans be enrolled in or get case management indefinitely?
So I think we need to clarify here kind of narrowly what we were talking about when we're talking about allowing for zero HAP HUD VASH families. So we're specifically talking about the allowance of zero HAP families to lease up in HUD VASH project-based units that are specifically either on VA facility sites or have on-site services that the veteran is able to access. So that's that specific allowance for zero HAP families to lease up in that specific case where they're eligible, but they're zero HAP, but they want to lease up in these HUD VASH project-based developments that would best meet their needs. And so this would be generally typically a small subset of eligible veterans. And we're saying for those veterans that came in as zero HAP through this kind of narrow set of circumstances, they're allowed to continue on the program, do not have to lose their voucher after being zero HAP for 180 days. So we're not time limiting their time on the HUD VASH program or in that unit for the 180 days like we typically do with the zero HAP family. This does not apply to tenant-based vouchers. So for the tenant-based HUD VASH program, there has to be a total tenant payment. The gross rent has to be higher than the total tenant payment. So there has to be a HAP that HUD is paying to be able to enter into that HUD and to be entered into that HAP contract. So it does not apply to the tenant-based program. And it doesn't apply to most of the project-based program, just for this kind of narrow set of circumstances. And regarding whether a zero HAP veteran can be enrolled in case management indefinitely, I think what we're saying is a veteran that came in as zero HAP is living in that HUD VASH PBV on a VA site or with the VA services will not lose their HUD VASH voucher due to being zero HAP. So as far as HUD is concerned, that unit can stay a HUD VASH unit, and then it would be up to the VA kind of when case management requirements have been fulfilled, if that veteran has graduated from case management, et cetera. So I don't know if Megan, you wanted to speak to anything else on that, or if there was more there that we needed to get into on that one.
I think you addressed it, Molly. I think that the key distinction I'm seeing in some of the questions is the distinction between zero HAP veterans in utilizing tenant-based vouchers versus project-based vouchers. Some thinking, and I think this is a little complicated also with some communities moving from 50 to 80% AMI and seeing more veterans who might be technically eligible for the program even without disregard of the VA service connected benefits, and but would be zero HAP. And so just to confirm, you are there haven't been any changes to the HAP requirements, the requirements for a veteran or an individual to have HAP for the tenant-based program. Could you confirm that I said that correctly?
Yes, I think that sounded right to me.
Okay, I just don't want to misstate.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that explanation. So let's see what we have next. Sorry, all this list is kind of long. Okay, so this participant is asking about applying the required changes, the timeline for that. So they're asking, is it okay to retroactively apply changes from 8/13 but no earlier? The revisions to the operating requirements.
Yes, no earlier, that they were not effective until they were published on August 13th. So that is the date you can begin applying the updated changes.
Okay, great. Next, for veterans that receive service-connected disability payments, do they receive the disability $400 deduction?
I am not familiar with that, so I am.
Molly, I can answer that.
Okay,
This is for the regular HCV program too, not just HUD VASH, but there's a mandatory elderly disabled deduction of $400. So if the veteran is considered disabled, then they will automatically receive that $400 deduction. That is the current deduction that housing authorities should be applying for participants who qualify as elderly or disabled.
Okay. Thanks, Susanna. We have a participant seeking clarity about an over-income veteran in a PBV unit that is not located on a VA property. can they stay in this unit with no assistance? And would they have to remove the unit from the PBV contract?
So if this is a HUD VASH unit that that we have an over income or a veteran, it's unclear to me over income meaning they are now at zero HAP. They've been at zero HAP for the 180 days, so they would be no longer on the voucher. If that is the scenario, they can stay in the unit with no assistance, but that unit, as noted in this question, would need to be removed from the PBV contract. So they can be housed in place. That unit would just no longer have the assistance attached to it because no assistance is being paid on that particular unit. And then after that veteran left the unit, the HUD VASH assistance could be reapplied to that unit. If you have a project-based development with assisted and unassisted units, you could potentially move that assistance to another unit within the same project. But yeah, assuming that's the case, if it's yes. So regardless, the veteran can be housed in place. You just the assistance would need to be removed from the unit.
Okay, great. This question involves SSVF. A participant is asking, are there plans for SSVF to follow the same guidance regarding service connection income? I don't know.
I can speak to that, Courtney.
Okay.
SSVF, the Supportive Services for Veteran Families program, which is a grant program out of VA, is exploring if there's a way that they could parallel these requirements. There's no change at the moment.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. Okay, we're asking another clarifying question. Does the new guidance mean that veterans have to be below 80% of AMI as well as qualified under any one of the categories in 24 CFR 982.201? There are some sections that were excluded. As stated in the Federal Register, or they're taking language straight from the notice, okay. Or does it mean that they just have to be below 80% of AMI with no other qualifiers?
Yeah, so I think this is just clarifying that they don't have to criteria to be able to go up to 80% AMI. And if that's the correct understanding, then yes, that is correct. And they just have to be below the 80% AMI, no additional qualifiers. By being HUD VASH, that means that they can go up to the 80% of AMI to include low-income veterans.
Okay, great. Okay, next question. Understanding that a VASH applicant remains eligible for a voucher even if they owe money to a housing authority. If they are applying to a housing authority they owe money to, would it be permissible to request that the veteran enter into a repayment plan to begin housing assistance participation?
Yes. So, so you cannot deny a veteran for access to the program. You cannot screen them out due to owing money to another housing authority or to the housing authority that they are applying to. However, you can work to put the veteran on a repayment plan and work with them on that. But you just cannot deny or screen out for that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a participant asking, if any advancement in eligibility is being implemented or in the works for veterans that may be on the lifetime sex offender registry.
So I don't have anything to speak to specifically on that one in terms of eligibility and the requirement to screen for veterans that are on the lifetime sex offender registry, but acknowledging, as noted in the presentation, that that is a state law designation, and know that states are regularly updating kind of how they define their kind of categorization of their sex offender registry. And so staying current with that and being super clear that that it is just lifetime sex offenders that are screened out from the program.
Okay.
And others had anything to add there?
No.
Nothing to add, Molly.
Okay, so I'll move on to the next one. If there's a client in a PBV currently who went to Zero HAP a year ago and is currently off program, can we bring that person back on program at Zero HAP?
So I think it would depend, again, with all of the kind of caveats that we've put on this allowance for Zero HAP families only applies to those that are eligible for the program, meet the eligibility criteria, are referred, and don't want to lease up in a PBV unit either on the grounds of a VA facility or in a VA, or excuse me, HUD VASH PBV with on-site VA services. So I think, you know, potentially, but only if a very narrow set of circumstances were met, and that veteran to be re-referred, I guess, would need to have maintained their HUD VASH eligibility. Yeah, I just, all of those clarifications on who the kind of narrow, very narrow set of circumstances in which a veteran can be admitted onto the program with Zero HAP.
Okay. Next question. Do you know if VA service connected disability benefits will be excluded for regular HCV as well for eligibility, or just HUD VASH?
So we are just excluding the VA service connected disability benefits for HUD VASH. There are those other categories of VA benefits that and disability payments that are, or VA payments that are excluded more broadly. But this specific exclusion for all VA service-connected disability benefits is exclusively for HUD VASH, not for the regular HCV program.
Okay. This next one is scenario-based, so forgive me if I don't articulate it clearly, but they're asking if a veteran moved into a PBV, but then got 100% service connection disability benefits, and they're over income, but stayed in their unit. Can we still give HUD VASH case management even though they are now off the PBB voucher?
I could speak to that for VA. I think it would be something we'd want to have a local conversation about. For sure, it would be important on the VA side that the veteran was connected to the appropriate support, whether those come directly from the HUD VASH team or from other VA resources or other community resources would really be based on the specifics of that situation. So I would strongly encourage you to work with your local leadership and your NHD and HUD VASH regional coordinator on the VA side with that kind of situation. We want to make sure the veteran is getting the services they need, regardless of their voucher status.
Okay, thanks, Megan. Participant is asking, could you speak to the pre-inspection update again? Can PHAs now inspect units 90 days before the RTA is submitted, or was it 90 days after?
Yeah, so clarifying there that it's the unit can be inspected 90 days before the RAFTA, the RTA is submitted. So you can maintain pre-inspected units for the HUD VASH program, and those pre-inspections remain valid for 90 days.
Okay, great. All right, so will HUD grant waivers for MTW PHAs that no longer meet compliance for serving substantially the same populations due to serving families at or over 80% AMI? Mm,
I'm not clear on that one, so that might be something
Yeah,
to ask for further clarification on what is intended there.
okay. If you want to add any clarification, please add it to the chat box and we'll try to get back to that one. But we're gonna move on to the next one for now. Let's see. Okay, so this PHA submitted an ROI and in agreement with their VA counterparts, they agreed that they could take on 10 or more additional HUD VASH vouchers based on staffing. They're asking that if they are offered more than that, is it okay for them to deny some due to lack of staffing capacity?
Yeah, so I'll speak to just generally kind of how the registration of interest and allocation process works, and we'll let Megan jump in from a VA perspective as well. But yes, in general, you come in for the registration of interest and we will, determine based on the need formula how many vouchers we're going to offer. You have the ability to accept fewer than the number of vouchers that are offered based on the need formula. We just kind of we just want to know kind of why the thought process there, and wanting to make sure that you're not not accepting vouchers that are needed there, right? So just the number that we offer through the allocation process is the maximum number of HUD VASH vouchers that we're offering. And at that time, you may accept the total number or request fewer, but we just want a justification for that. And I'll see if Megan has anything to add on that.
The only thing I would add is just that in an ideal world, the vouchers that are awarded would be the number that are for which there's a need in the community, right? And so our hope would be that resource limitations on both the VA side and the PHA side wouldn't be a reason for denying vouchers. We understand that there's sometimes other reasons, or sometimes those reasons are part of the calculation. But I think I could speak for Molly, your team, and ours on the VA side as well, that if there is a need for more vouchers and there's a administrative or case management resource barrier to accepting them, we'd love to be part of that conversation before the vouchers are turned away.
Okay, great. Okay, this next one is about VA service-connected income, and the participant is asking for clarification on if this income counts towards HAP or not.
Yeah, so just offering again that clarification that the exclusion of service-connected disability does not impact any of the rent calculations, doesn't impact the total tenant payment, the TTP, the HAP, the housing assistance.
You are joined as the host.
It does not impact any of those things. It only impacts initial eligibility. That will not dictate anything about the income that is going towards rent. That will, all of that service-connected disability benefit will, as it always has been, be taken into account for those calculations.
Okay. And this next question is in reference to the 120 and 140% FMR. It is written as, I'm sorry, this is not singularly.
Yeah,
Okay, did you see that one, Molly?
Yeah, let me try my best to just clarification here. It looks like this question is regarding the payment standard and exception payment standard options, and that it is written as a may. And you know, are there concerns around with the expanded eligibility criteria? More veterans having no HAP, and how are we addressing that? And so I think in taking this in a couple of parts, acknowledging that there may be more veterans that ultimately do not have a HAP. Their total tenant payment, total tenant portion is not less than the gross rent. And so there is no HAP. And so I think just saying that, acknowledging that may be somewhat more frequent, giving this expanded eligibility. And then regarding the question about the payment standard, yes, it is an option for PHAs. And so as you are kind of working with this expanded eligibility criteria, I think this is a good kind of framing of having that conversation of, do we need to look at the HUD VASH payment standard? As noted in the operating requirements, you can go up to 120% specifically for HUD VASH families without additional HUD approval. You can go beyond that 120% with additional HUD approval if needed to be able to lease your HUD VASH vouchers. And then that 140% that was detailed in the notice is specifically for reasonable accommodations that PHAs can now have go up to 140% as a HUD VASH reasonable accommodation payment standard for those veterans that have a disability that would necessitate a reasonable accommodation. Those can go up to 140% without additional HUD approval. So I think kind of just acknowledging kind of the two pieces of that question, and hopefully that was sufficient clarification on that.
Thanks for that, Molly. Does applying the minimum rent being $0, does that apply now and moving forward?
Yes, so if you choose, again, this is the minimum rent. New section on minimum rents is a may. PHAs may set a separate HUD VASH minimum rent that is lower than or a $0 HUD VASH minimum rent, even if they have a non-zero non-zero minimum rent for their regular voucher program. That can be implemented now. Again, that is a may, so that's going to need to be detailed. How PHAs are applying that is going to need to be detailed in their PHA admin plan. But that is an option to set that $0 minimum rent for specifically the HUD VASH program.
Okay.
If you didn't have a $0 minimum rent already.
Okay. If a PHA has a RAD PBV project with units set aside for VASH PBV, can the PHA switch VASH PBV units with RAD PBV units?
It's unclear to me the kind of how the RAD PBV units are being applied here, and defer to others, the PBV experts that I don't think are here on this call from our team. But in general, the PHA can, using the Exhibit A, designate or redesignate units as HUD VASH PBV units versus non-HUD VASH PBV units. Those just need to be identified in the Exhibit A of the HAP contract. So that's the general answer. If there's any nuance to the RAD PBV that I'm missing there, I'll defer to others.
Okay. All right, so this next one, can a veteran submit a DD-214 to cover all identification items, ID, birth certificate, SSN, and not require additional documents?
So as noted in the income, or rather the identity and eligibility verification and documentation section, the DD-214 is one option to meet the identification requirements. PHAs need to follow the Social Security number hierarchy to verify identity. The DD-214 is one option to be able to do that. In the case of the veteran, the PHA must accept the DD-214 as that piece of identification. And, you know, if the SSN is then able to be verified, then that would be sufficient. So it's, yes, I mean, in general, the DD-214 can cover that option. It just need to follow the verification hierarchy.
Okay. Okay, so this next one, if a veteran passes away, are criminal background checks required on the other members of the household or family?
So if the veteran passes away, in that case, the HUD VASH assistants can stay with the remaining family members. Necessarily a rescreening, a required rescreening process. So if the veteran passes away, the remaining household members may retain the assistance. We would ask that they be moved on to a regular housing choice voucher if one is available. However, if one is not available, then they may retain the HUD VASH assistance. We would just want to move them onto a regular voucher so that HUD VASH assistance could then be issued to a veteran who is eligible for the program and is receiving that case management from the VA, but the remaining family members may retain that assistance as long as they need to.
Okay. So this next question, is about when a VASH participant reaches zero HAP. They're asking if they're, after they've paid full rent after 6 months, do PHAs EOP them like in the HCV program? And do they lose their case management?
So I'll speak to the first piece of this question. When a VASH participant reaches zero HAP, traditionally in the program, so they've reached zero HAP rather, and they've been zero HAP for the 180 days. So they've been paying their full rent for 6 months. Then yes, they would be exited from the voucher program, just like other HCV. It would be, I'll let Megan speak to kind of how the case management piece is handled at that point.
I'm sorry, I struggled with my mute button. So when veterans are kind of like we discussed earlier, with veterans who maybe remain in a PBV unit but are no longer attached to the voucher, it's the responsibility of the HUD VASH program to transition veterans who are no longer in the program off to do a warm handoff to the appropriate services. So in general, a veteran is enrolled in HUD VASH case management when they're moving toward getting a voucher, and services are provided before the voucher is issued, and then for the duration of time they have the voucher. So if they no longer have the voucher for any reason, and the intention is not to get a new voucher, like they're not moving to a different location, et cetera, they've been they're over income, or they've moved on to additional service needs, then ultimately that veteran would be discharged from HUD VASH case management, but the goal would be that there would be a warm handoff to other community services, and there might be local variations in the length of time that takes.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, our next question, can you explain the special monthly pension and who qualifies?
I'm guessing this might be specific to VA's non-service connected pension, but I'm not entirely sure. So I'm inclined to take that one for the record. Non-service connected pension is a pension available to some veterans, but I don't want to off the cuff say the eligibility wrong. And I'm not certain that that's what's being referred to here.
Okay. Okay. If you want to submit clarifying information, please do so in the chat. For now, I will move on to the next question. If the PHA becomes a DSP, must the PHA provide case management services to the VASH family, or can we rely on the VAMC for those case management services?
I'll let Megan jump in here, but I just to first jump in on this to say it really I think it's important to note that the PHA as DSP kind of relationship with their partnering VA medical center really will be dictated by kind of what makes sense locally. There's a template of how it looks and what is required, but really the PHA and the medical center are going to enter into that MOA, and they're going to kind of detail what the expectations are as far as you know, the intake, the referring back to VA, that length of time. We say it can't be more than 180 days, but we don't dictate that it must be 180 days that the PHA has to essentially reverse refer the veteran back to the VA for their ongoing case management. And then what that kind of temporary case management looks like. So I think one of the key things here is that it can really look different depending on how you've designed it to look locally, kind of within the parameters that are on that application site and guidance that we highlighted earlier. I'll see if Megan has anything to add.
Molly, I think you did a good job. I would just highlight again the part of the requirement, the core requirement is that PHA can provide temporary case management to bridge the veterans over. So they do have linkages to services, but the timelines of the process for that would be local, and it would be identified in your local MOU, which would be part of your application process.
Okay. Okay. Can a PHA apply at a later time for more VASH vouchers during the next year if they don't submit the ROI by the 30th?
Yes. So if for whatever reason you're interested in additional vouchers but are not able to come in under this current 2024 allocation by next Friday, the 30th, we anticipate having additional funding opportunities. Nothing is guaranteed, but we will make any funding that remains available after we make awards under this notice. We'll make that available under a future notice. Yes, if you remain interested in HUD VASH vouchers, we anticipate being able to make additional awards. And if not under an additional appropriation, we also, as we highlighted, the recapture and reallocation feature of the program under PIH notice 2022-25.
Okay, thank you. I'll just ask a couple more since we're almost at time, one or two more. So for the next one, what type of VA facility would qualify for the selection of a PDB?
I could put a link in the chat to the Enhanced Use Lease program, but in general, VA facilities wouldn't in and of themselves become PPVs. It would simply be buildings on VA land that are leased to a different provider, and they would follow, in general, the same requirements that any other building would for a PPV.
Okay.
Molly, is there anything you want to add to that?
Nope. Nope. I think that's a good explanation. A good place to start.
Okay. If a zero HAP veteran is graduated from case management, should they be discharged from the HUD VASH program?
I'm a little confused about the question, but I'll try to guess. If the veteran is no longer in the HUD VASH program and that they're no longer utilizing a voucher, then in general, yes, they would be discharged from HUD VASH case management with that warm handoff to the most appropriate services. If the veteran retains a voucher but no longer needs case management services, then there's just minimal requirements for the VA to maintain contact to support the veteran family as needed.
Okay. Okay, and I guess I'll make this one the last question really quickly. Would increasing AMI allow for receiving more assistance from the VASH voucher? Does the voucher cover more of the rent or allow them to find a unit with higher rent?
Okay, yeah, good place to end it on this clarification. So the higher AMI and the exclusion of disability income also really apply only to the eligibility for the program. So in terms of the calculation of the rent and the tenant portion and the HAP, that would not be impacted by the increase eligibility criteria as far as income. So that does not change how much HUD would pay and what the total tenant portion would be. That calculation for each individual veteran would remain consistent. The thing that would change is if you went to a higher payment standard, that would change what that payment standard calculation would look like. So kind of two different places to look at kind of two different things.
Okay.
And I think that
Okay.
I think the one question that folks I think still have is will the slides be available? So
Yes.
let you answer that one.
Yes, they will be available. They're forthcoming. They will be on the HUD VASH website shortly. And with that, thank you so much for attending our webinar. Thank you for your insightful questions, and please, please keep them coming. You can drop them in the vash@hud.gov mailbox, and we'll get back to you on those. If you didn't get to your questions today, please forward it there as well. Any questions, comments, concerns, you can always reach out to myself or Molly on those. And if there's nothing else, I will let you all go. We're at time. Thank you so much and have a great afternoon.